Good afternoon. My name is Liz Plater-Zyberk. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Miami, and it gives me great pleasure to moderate yet another research panel at CNU. The goal for this session, and we had one yesterday that Dr. Chuck Bowl moderated, is to bring research projects to the CNU, but also to give researchers and faculty the opportunity for peer review, which is important to their career path in the university. Some of you may have been in the room next door immediately prior to this, where Dr. Larry Frank talked about the research that he's been carrying on for a long career, which has indeed influenced policy and the whole discussion about obesity in the built environment, health in the built environment. And so I think we all understand the value of developing peer-reviewed research capacity across the disciplines which are related to the new urbanism. So this afternoon we have three presentations. Jaime Correa, who also faculty at the University of Miami, who managed the research sessions this year, made the suggestion that a topic be addressed to focus the work, and that was indeed tactical urbanism. And so we will begin with a presentation on transportation impacts and value of a certain kind of tactical urbanism, the parklet. Secondly, going on to how the Denver bike sharing system originated in tactical urbanism efforts, and finally pulling out a little bit to a bigger picture with an examination of how tactical urbanism could be assisted by the toolkits of pattern language. So I have asked each speaker to introduce themselves briefly, just to help us move along, and the presentations will be about 10 minutes, and that should give us enough time to have a discussion afterwards. So, from parking to park.
Hi everyone, my name is Danielle. I'm a current master's student at UC Berkeley studying city planning and transportation engineering. My background before that is public policy and community development. Thanks.
My name is Andy Duvall. I'm a research assistant professor at the University of Colorado, Denver. My background is in anthropology and looking at how people interact with spaces. My doctorate is in health and behavioral sciences, and I was an IGERT National Science Foundation funded student.
I'm Michael Mehaffy. I'm Executive Director of Sustasis Foundation. I see one of our board members, Bernie Franceschi, here, and I'm also doing doctoral work in related topics at Delft University of Technology. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So I guess I'll start. Hi everyone, thanks for coming out here on a very sunny Saturday afternoon. I really appreciate you guys all making out here. And so today I'll be presenting about my research on parklets, so this really cool emerging urban innovation. And as a quick overview, I know that this is the last day of CNU. You guys have taken a lot of information in, and one thing that I've learned from my professors is always to point out 3 important things that you can take away. So by the end of this presentation, I hope that you guys have another layer of understanding of what parklets are, how diverse they are, some of their full impacts, especially on transportation, so thinking in terms of pedestrian traffic, vehicular traffic, etc., and also the value that they add and ways to measure that value. So I compared parklets to parking space, and also I'll be talking about an analytic hierarchy process. So first, just to set the framework and make sure we're all on the same page, what are parklets and how do they emerge? And I think that Don Shoup's High Cost of Free Parking, for those of you who haven't read it, it's really great. It really gets to this, that subsidies mask the true cost of parking, that there's an oversupply that creates a lot of negative externalities, increases energy consumption. What we take for granted, this free parking is not actually quite free. And that also there's a real desire to bring nature back into cities. So you can see here there's a pretty exciting looking street, right? So in 2005, San Francisco art and design firm Rebar Group, they installed a temporary park just for 2 hours in downtown San Francisco. So if you see here, that was the image before, and this is what they did, which is pretty awesome. See, it's complete with a lawn, shade tree, and park bench, sparked parking day movement. You can see here there's a lot of cool parklets, converting curbside parallel parking spaces into these public spheres. And what's pretty cool about that was, so Rebar Group, that was in 2005, and San Francisco's planning department started a Pavement to Parks program, which seeks to identify these underutilized spaces and then turn them into public spaces. So not just parklets, but also plazas, et cetera. So here's the San Jose Guerrero Park. Pretty beautiful. And the success of Parking Day and the rise of tactical urbanism, especially in the last 10 years, has really encouraged more experiments. And I wanted to draw attention to this manual that was put out earlier this year. I think it's really great. If you haven't seen it, it's a great resource that tells you a lot about the design considerations and how would you go about actually starting a parklet. So that was the background on the diversity of parklets. And for me, I just moved to the Bay Area, and seeing these really fascinating, looking at the literature, it focuses almost exclusively about parklets as a placemaking tool. And I'm a student of transportation. I'm studying transportation engineering and city planning, and I come in with that lens. So I think to myself, more information is needed, especially when you're talking about something as sensitive as parking. People view parking as free, like don't touch my parking. So you can imagine that if you have a critical mass or like a critical number of parklets, how would that actually affect pedestrian traffic, vehicular traffic, and thinking in terms like what value do parklets add? So I come in with a lot of different questions that I'm trying to answer. And so I did as what a lot of scholars do, which is to conduct a case study. So I looked at San Francisco. Here's a map from the planning department of all their tactical urbanism projects, and what's in green are the highlighted parklets. And I looked specifically at, does this work? Yeah, here. So I looked at the Mission neighborhood in San Francisco. For those of you who are from the Bay Area, it's a very hipster area, but I chose that in particular because of the high concentration of parklets and also because of the availability of parking data, which I'll get to after. So I looked specifically at this one block that had 3 parklets on it. Identified here, Valencia Street, so Dolores Park. So this parklet is hosted by a bike shop, and it has a bike corral and also some seating. This is the Deepistan National Parklet. It has an official Facebook page and everything. It's pretty great. Or it's also known as the Deeplet. It's hosted by a San Francisco resident. And then this is hosted by Blue Fig, a coffee shop, and it has tables and seats. And so in thinking about how you would evaluate pedestrian traffic, doing a very qualitative observation. There's the San Francisco Great Streets Project. They had a bunch of pedestrian counts, pedestrian surveys to do like a before and after, before you construct a parklet, and afterwards, seeing how people engage with it, right? Do people, are they sitting there? Are they just passing through? What are they doing? So following the same model, I observed the 3 parklets on that block and saw on an afternoon and an evening, and just made lots of observations in the vein of like William Wyatt and Kevin Lynch. And what I found was that, you know, parklets are extremely diverse, as you've seen, and not all are created equal. So going back here, the one hosted by the coffee shop saw the most activity. You know, they had seating and tables, and it's interesting to note that even though it's hosted by a coffee shop, I saw other people coming from other blocks with like different coffees. So it's still a fairly public sphere. But the parklet that's a green space, so the deep lit, I didn't see that many people stopping or using it. So just need to point out in terms of that the design aesthetics affect pedestrian traffic. And in looking at vehicular impacts, so analysis of the parking activity, I used SF Park data. So SF Park is a pilot program that started a couple years ago in San Francisco. It's a on-demand parking management system. So it dynamically prices parking spaces according to like how many people they expect to use it, with the goal of achieving 85% occupancy rate. And so using that data, I was comparing this 900 block on Valencia Street with other blocks on Valencia Street that didn't have parklets, and seeing if there were any trends you can notice, because you might expect that the blocks with parklets have different occupancy rates. So here, just using the SF Park occupancy data, so there's the 900 block, and there's another block on Valencia Street that also has parklets, and then the blocks without, also on Valencia Street, that there aren't that many trends you can see right here initially. So from this, it suggests that at this point in time, by just taking away a few parking spaces, that parklets do not have a significant impact on parking activity. But who knows what might happen in the future. So I talked a bit about thinking about the transportation impacts in terms of pedestrian traffic and vehicular traffic, and like circling and parking spillover. So what is the value of a parklet compared to a parking space? So using a lot of different reports, came up with generally a price for what that parking space would be in the mission. So the city is foregoing parking meter revenue from citations, yet they're also gaining operations and maintenance and different environmental and indirect costs, right? So the net benefit for just one parking space, I calculated that to be nearly $5,000. And so if you multiply that by 2 parking spaces, which is what a parklet typically takes up, it's nearly $10,000. And a typical parklet application, that's how much the city gets. So from this analysis, it suggests that the city is willing to forego $7,500 annually in favor of a parklet. So from here, it makes me think that, well, what are the social and environmental benefits that that can make that up too, and like what is the additional value of a parklet? And I think that the process called the analytic hierarchy process approach is one frame. It's an alternative to traditional cost-benefit analysis. I don't know about any of you, but if you try to quantify a lot of like social, environmental benefits, GHG reductions, it's extremely difficult to quantify. And I'm offering this as an alternative or as a new tool to a new metric and another way that you can think about it for a hypothetical parklet model for any type of major decisions that you make. So the way that it works, I'll explain through example. So excuse me for all you designers out here, a bunch of tables now. So here, it's a decision-making tool, so having different alternatives. So before I identified that parklets are really diverse, it could be for like a green space or with seating or as a gathering space. And then so thinking about your different decisions that you have to make and the different factors that might follow through it, and then having different weighted scores. And then calculating or like ranking them in terms of what you think would be for each alternative. So for example, for traffic calming and increases safety, by not having a parklet, that's a really like terrible benefit, so it gets a 1, and then it's fairly important here, and so you can create a composite benefit score. And you, similarly doing that with the costs here. Okay, thanks. And so just to wrap up, so comparing, you can create using the analytic hierarchy process, a ranking tool, so benefits and costs. And thinking about it, not building a parklet, it's still pretty costly, but again, not all parklets are created equal, so design considerations are important. So with parklets with seating and tables might have more value than, say, a parklet that just has some green space. So before, when I started off the presentation, I wanted to stress like the diversity, the impacts, and the value of parklets, and I hope that I provided some insight just to think about parklets more than just a placemaking tool. Think of it in terms of the potential transportation impacts that it has, and also another way to quantify the value of parklets. And thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Again, my name's Andy Duvall. I'm here to share the story about how Denver got a bike sharing system. So very quickly, a show of hands, how many people know what public bike sharing is? Almost everybody, great. If you get a chance, you should definitely check out the green bike system here in Salt Lake City while you're here. So first off, Denver's one of the most car-dependent cities historically in the U.S. So how did it end up with one of the first bike-sharing systems in the country? And then how did this process end up having a real effect that started to increase and modify the share of bicycle mode share throughout the city? Starting in 2007, Denver was chosen as the site for the 2008 Democratic National Convention. And at the time, Mayor Hickenlooper declared that it would be the greenest in the history of mankind. He's a kind of flamboyant character, likes to make pretty bold statements. He's now the governor of Colorado, but at the time, that threw a lot of gears in motion to try to define what that means and to understand and put into practice what a sustainable large event might look like. So one of the components of this challenge was taken up by bicycle advocates in the city and the area. They were very loosely affiliated at that time and not very professional, and this process helped change that quite a bit. The initial idea came about through at the time, recent opening of the Paris-Vélib bike sharing system. It opened during the summer of 2007. At the time in Denver, I was probably one of the few people who was aware of what public bike sharing was. And through some chance contacts, I came into contact with some people in the Denver mayor's office who had an interest and maybe putting in place a temporary bike sharing system for the DNC and wanted to know if it was practical. So that was in late 2007. The Democratic National Convention was in August of 2008. So the time period to make this happen was fairly quick. Through connections and local community leaders and business leaders, as well as through the advocacy community and various other community groups, a group with the task of bringing a temporary bike sharing system into action sprang up and immediately began work. One of the connections was with Bikes Belong, which is a national bike advocacy organization based in Boulder. They were able to source bikes from manufacturers, brand new bikes that were donated for temporary use for the system. They came like this. They ultimately were able to provide 1,000 bikes that were located at 6 automated stations. Now the bikes came dealer ready, which means that they required a fair amount of assembly and a lot of room to house the bikes. And so through community efforts, a warehouse was located, the use of which was donated by local business owner, and a wide variety of different types of volunteers came together to assemble the bikes, to choose station sites, and this whole process really started to pull the community together. Ultimately, this is what happened. This is the freewheeling public bike sharing system. This is an example of one station located in central downtown. This was just prior to the convention taking off, and so it's not quite as fully populated. But during the convention, the 6 stations that were spread around in downtown were very popular, and immediately it was perceived that this would be something great to have in the long term. And so the group of advocates and organizers that came together decided that this was something worth seizing, and so really pushed for a permanent system. Here's another shot of the bikes at the DNC at one of the stations. A lot of bikes. Once the system had been in operation, actually prior to this system being in operation, it started gaining momentum toward a permanent long-term public bike sharing system. There wasn't an example existing in the US at the time, and so a lot of it had to be invented at the ground level. And many of the people involved helped develop what bike sharing is currently in the US, including the vendor that supplies the bikes that are here in Salt Lake City, as well as many other places. One of the key initial parts of bringing this to success was garnering political buy-in. Mayor Hickenlooper became interested in the project, and consequently it was decided to make a similar temporary system for Minneapolis for the Republican National Convention in 2008. And so there started to be a bit of a friendly competition between the mayors of the 2 cities. Along with this, prior to the DNC itself, the groundswell of interest among the bike community led to a planning charrette trying to envision what bikes would mean to Denver in the future. Here are the two mayors and members of their staff riding during the DNC. Here's the final night of the convention at the time in Vesco Field when then candidate Obama spoke. 1,500 bikes showed up from the population, privately owned bikes, as well as nearly half of the bikes that were in the temporary fleet. Prior to the DNC as well, there was a huge project to try to improve the street infrastructure, including some of the first applications of sharrows in Denver. Here's an example of this is the street network. The red are bicycle facilities, on-street bicycle facilities. Also, during the DNC, it became apparent that measurement was going to be very important. And so each bike was equipped with a way to measure its use. There ended up being 5,500 plus rides and about 26,000 miles over the course of 3 days.
How many miles?
26,000. This is an example of a shot of some of the people that were commuting in and out of downtown. This project really started to build speed in the bicycling community in Denver. It really solicited a lot of community involvement and provided helpful pressure from the outside for change in government agencies and policies. Bicycle facilities became desired and even demanded in various neighborhoods throughout the city. And people really started taking advantages of opportunities to improve and increase bike use. Expanding political capital is something that is not part of the infrastructural developments, but part of building the culture of bicycling in the city. And there's an emergence of a bicycling constituency. With the launch of the permanent B-cycle system, it depended a lot on volunteers and community members, hundreds of which volunteered to help with the bikes. It also led to expansion of the professionalization of the local bike advocacy community. This is a bike parking facility that's temporarily set up for large events. Bike Denver, the local bike advocacy group, provides bike parking, secure bike parking for dozens of events throughout the year. In 2008, this bar here, that's when the DNC occurred. And since then, there's been growth in the bicycle commuter mode share as measured by the US Census American Community Survey. It's not a perfect measure, but it's the best thing that there is available currently. It's not a direct correlation with the advent of the Denver B-Cycle permanent bike sharing system, which happened in 2010, but it shows a groundswell of interest and support for bicycling activity. Here's current Mayor Hancock talking at Bike to Work Day. So very quickly, the tactical urbanism components involved with this project. I wasn't familiar with the term tactical urbanism at the time. No one involved with the project was, but it fits many of the 5 items associated with tactical urbanism. It's a deliberate approach to instigating change that has come about and become supported throughout the community. It's actually had a wider impact than anyone, I think, originally would have envisioned. There are now more than 24 bike sharing systems in the US. There are about 500 worldwide. Denver's bike sharing system that developed through the DNC experience has helped to inform a lot of the cities that have since adopted bike sharing. And the realization of this really came into play after the DNC project was a success. People saw it and experienced it and realized that it could be something positive for their neighborhoods and their city. and working toward the future. All right? Thanks.
See if I can get. I'm just right there. Huh? That should do it. Yeah, great. Good afternoon, everybody. What I'd like to do is describe for you some research that we've been doing. I mentioned earlier Sustasis Foundation and our colleague Bernie Franceschi there, as well as some other work at universities, Arizona State, and other institutions on using pattern languages as a specific tool and a specific way forward in tactical urbanism, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I think the growing interest in tactical urbanism reflects also a growing awareness that we're going to have to make urban changes more catalytically, as the Mike Lydon list suggested, especially in an age of more limited resources. We're going to have to do more with less. And for a number of interesting reasons, that's actually a pretty positive opportunity. I'll discuss those reasons in a minute. But I'll argue that to do that, we need effective tools that can work together in a kind of coordinated toolkit form. And the tools have to be able to evolve and adapt to target specific requirements and barriers. So I completely agree we need to see implementation of these, and we're working on that in some projects as well that I'll mention. But first, what I'll do is describe an example of an approach aimed at meeting these requirements using an expanded system of pattern languages that we've been developing in this research. And as many of you probably know, pattern languages have been quite effective in software design and in other fields, although they've been neglected for interesting reasons in the fields of urban planning and building design. But as I'd like to explore with you now, I think this presents an intriguing opportunity for those of us in the built environment to learn from these folks and the fabulous successes they've had and apply those lessons to tactical urbanism in particular. I'll start by noting that all of the related emerging concepts and approaches of tactical urbanism and urban acupuncture, peer-to-peer urbanism, economic gardening, and so on, follow the insight that was probably first discussed most thoroughly by Jane Jacobs, that urban planning and design are not linear sequential engineering processes. They require an understanding and an exploitation of the dynamics of self-organization, an understanding, as Jacobs put it, of the kind of problem a city is. That problem is fundamentally one of managing a network of factors, not just one or two silver bullets. And so this requires a different way of thinking, what Jacobs famously called a web way of thinking, and a different way of acting. We can't treat the city as a tree, as a kind of simple hierarchy working from the top down, as Christopher Alexander also pointed out in his landmark paper by that name. We have to see the city as a semi-lattice, as a mix or interacting factors that are producing the outcomes that we see, whether those are good or bad outcomes. And these outcomes are generated through a complex interaction of incentives and disincentives, what we might think of as the kind of operating system that governs the kinds of design and construction activities that can take place, and especially how much a certain kind of development activity costs in relation to how much it's rewarded, whether it pencils and so on. And this operating system includes all the laws, the rules, fees, standards, and all the parameters that drive us all crazy in our work, but that ultimately do govern what can be done and where, and for what cost and reward, both financial rewards and other kinds of rewards. So we have to go after this complex network of barriers, the disincentives to good development and the hidden incentives for bad development, like the so-called externalities that are subsidized by taxpayers in the future, and really by all of us in the future. A couple of the concerted steps that I think we have to take to target these barriers through a kind of acupuncture strategy, if you will, were identified by my students in a research project at Arizona State. Increase certainty in the entitlement process. Uncertainty equals risk equals cost. Lower the relative cost of higher density projects by easing the regulatory requirements like parking, work to reduce costs, streamline regulations for mixed use and infill development by coordinating what are often conflicting requirements, work to overcome fragmented land ownership patterns by partnering with entities that can work in a more coordinated way and assemble opportunity sites and so on, lead the playing field relative to suburban edge development, level the playing field relative to suburban edge development by eliminating the often hidden subsidies for suburban edge development and requiring all development to pay its true cost to taxpayers and citizens, something that everybody can get behind, I think Tea Party and others. Examine fees and other pricing signals, SDC costs and other things. Overcome the chicken and egg problem of weak markets by identifying strategic problems and going after those tactically with things like farmers markets. Compensate for lack of capital for larger, more conventional development projects by incentivizing smaller pay-as-you-go development and preparing sites for incremental development. Again, this is where we really get into tactical urbanism. So the approach here is to go after all of those goals with specific tools and toolkits. They're out there. We all know many of these local improvement districts, tax increment finance and so on, but they need to be made easy to use, simple. Regulations need to be streamlined. These things need to be made to work in a kind of plug-and-play approach. And the pattern language strategy lends itself very much to that. For example, taking the place, as many of you may know, the place types system used for transit-oriented developments. If you take that as a kind of place pattern system and have sub-patterns that are all able to be used in different sites and customized to those local sites. What's really behind all this is what's going on in the software community. I'll go back just a moment and note that all of these issues are interrelated. We can't just do one or two. We have to take concerted action, so we have to have a coordinated approach. So at Sustasis, we've been working with a number of really interesting people, including this fellow on the left here, the remarkable inventor of Wiki, Ward Cunningham, who is also a pioneer of agile development, if you remember that term. And there's a real important lesson for us. Agile is a kind of tactical approach that cuts through the complexity, but that uses a network of tools and approaches that are plug and play in just this way. And Ward is also a pioneer of pattern languages, and there is an important connection there. Pattern languages also provide this capacity to manage networks of factors and to achieve simpler and more elegant outcomes. And that's why they've developed such usefulness, such power really in software, and led directly to such useful inventions as Wiki and other tools. So patterns and pattern languages provide an essential capability that's not easy to achieve with a more linear technology, the ability to create these functional networks in both structure and in process in a very simplified, coordinated way. So in the case of urban systems, we're also dealing with interconnected spatial networks, networks of place. And I want to talk just for a moment about that because it's an important difference from the software. This interconnected network pattern stretches across kinds of structure as well as scales of structure. For example, street networks, pedestrian paths, small and room-like urban spaces, even building details, all manifest this kind of network structure where the user can control and modulate the membranes, if you will, between these different structural elements. And likewise, the processes that people undergo to structure spaces over time and the tools that they use also manifest the characteristics of networks. All of these structures extend across a wide range of scales and across a wide range of scales of space as well as time. Here's this street in London that I showed you before, and what's interesting is you'll see over 8 years the two shots were taken. There have been many more changes where the users themselves have come in and mutated, made small changes to the balconies and to their private spaces and to railings and hedges and entryways and so on. So I think the job of us as tactical urbanists is not so much to make these mutations for the users as to actually empower the users to make these kinds of mutations themselves as the kinds of agents that are making the city, the autocatalytic, the self-organizing agents. In this way, the tactical urbanist is not specifying urban growth, which is always going to be inherently limited as an approach, but is generating growth on a possibly much larger and certainly more complex scale by providing the DNA, if you will, that can generate this structure. So as I close, I want to show you just a few slides of some of the tools that we're developing, and I mentioned we're working on a few projects, including a DPZ project in eastern Washington where we're using pattern languages and using that as part of the charrette process. Very interesting results we're getting there. Again, this is a spatial network. This is just to show you an example. Here's Portland, Oregon. Here's Italy. Again, these are spatial networks that the users are mutating and making changes over time. And I would argue that that's what's happening in the greatest cities that we know all over the world, and that's what's not happening in our failing modern segregated zoning. So we're doing paper pattern languages. This is one that my students did at Arizona State, farmers market, town center pattern, really good sensible stuff. Other kinds of pattern languages based upon the computer that give people the ability to work with the language as a kind of a wiki, a community design wiki. This is what we did in New Orleans when we were working on these concepts, giving them pre-approved plans and readiness diagnostics, ways to really simplify and understand and make this very intimidating process user-friendly so the homeowners and the business owners themselves could start repairing and rebuilding their homes. Just to mention, talking about bicycles, we looked at, with the city of Portland, a bicycle pattern language system, also a biphilia pattern language system, which is taking some of the insights from healthcare design, applying those to urban systems on a broader scale, and again with the mini parks and all the other things that we have been talking about today. What's also interesting is Ward has integrated the capability to handle data with patterns so that the patterns can exchange data between each other and use that as very rapid and efficient scenario modeling, very simple and easy to use. This is work he did for Nike doing their sustainability metrics. So I'm working now on an urban sustainability thing looking specifically at carbon, but it could also be looking at other issues. For example, if you could give people handhelds and have them go out and do measurements of their own community and do this kind of crowdsourcing measurement work. There's a number of other kinds of tools that are very exciting, we think, in terms of the capability of computers, particularly when they're distributed and they empower people to be these kind of catalytic, tactical urbanists. So again, we think this is very exciting work, and we'd love to talk to those of you who are interested in perhaps collaborating with us. Thank you.
So I'd like to not delay very much in bringing us to questions from the audience, but I think the first question might be, how do we bring these diverse presentations together for a discussion? I found it kind of interesting that the first two really were about individual efforts, from the very smallest effort that a cafe owner might be able to do in front of their, a cafe operator in front of their business, to something that requires a little bit more coordination, and in fact spoke of a process of people coming together to decide to do the bicycle system, to an approach that's really a kind of societal tactic of how to enable, you use the word, to for people to be able to make changes quickly. I think the one shared goal, of course, here is, just as it is in the CNU, positive, to be a positive change agent in the city. And I think the two examples that we saw were remarkable for the speed with which, and of course that's an aspect of tactical urbanism, with which some action or goal could be implemented. Both projects, the parklets and the bicycles, being less than a decade, and probably even less than that, but from the time of inception and thinking about it and being able to look back on the achievement. And so doing something in less than a decade is really an achievement in the city, I think. What you saw in these presentations was really very clear and concise PowerPoints. The papers are more thorough, and if you're interested in them, you might find them, I think, on the CNU website, if not now, soon. But I'd like to start with a question for Andrew, and then maybe we'll go to you all can be thinking about your questions. You used two phrases in the paper, which I didn't hear in the presentation, but I found intriguing because you spoke of the fact that tactical urbanism offers an opportunity for, you did mention collaborative work, but you used the terms iterative thinking and knowledge controversies. And so since there are always opposing opinions about anything and great fear of trying something new, I'm presuming you were referring to that in terms of knowledge controversies, but could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, sure. I think iterative thinking really was very applied in the instance of the DNC temporary bike sharing system. It was inventing it on the ground as it was happening. And so the controversies arose through differing perspectives of how it should be done. And encountering people who said, no, it can't happen, and insisting that it can. And it's really just a matter of learning how to negotiate and to be inclusive among a variety of different groups that may ultimately have the same goal, but different ways to get there. One thing that we found was there isn't always one right answer. And sometimes taking those multiple correct answers and applying them in specific cases, I'm thinking specifically regarding siting stations, deciding where they should go, getting permits and land use agreements associated with them. That process is incredibly complex. And without differing opinions that sometimes clashed, it wouldn't have been possible.
Questions from the floor?
I think you sold the first presentation a little short because it's actually brilliant, as they all were. And really, it illustrates what Michael's talking about. And one of my complaints usually at conferences is I say they're at the case study. All we do is get case studies, no meta thinking and no meta learning. Actually, there's meta learning in that presentation. And that's what Michael's talking about. But really what
So you're bringing up the point that it's a way of experimenting which planning has never been able to afford.
Experimenting and systematizing and capturing the meta, which we don't do. There's all these great individualized examples of best practice here and there, and it's never analyzed and captured. And I work in bike sharing, and that is one of the problems with bike sharing. We define everything as a success. We don't learn.
Thank you. I think I should ask everybody to identify themselves. We like to get to know each other. Yes. Pardon me?
I'm Richard Lehman
From Washington. Thank you.
Liz?
Yes.
Just to comment on that, thanks. I agree, as you know, because we've talked about this before, but there is one thing about, just to note about the pattern language approach, which is that the patterns are not designs in the abstract that are brought down. You know, they really are sort of little experiments that, and particularly when you have a project pattern language, the whole thing is kind of an experiment, and out of that might emerge a whole new pattern. So it is very much a sort of on-the-ground, tactical kind of process that is supposed to generate these things. In fact, that's one of the problems, is that hasn't happened enough in the architecture world. In software, people are brilliant at doing this, but we've been lagging behind.
Other questions? Yes. Please tell us who you are.
I'm Jim Hill from the city of Richmond, and thank you for bringing up the phrase knowledge controversies, because I feel like that's something that we encounter. I think Jeffrey Tomlin in some of his presentations talks about you have to figure out what your values are before you can work out how to go forward. It's almost like a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. When we as planners, we come up with something using our values and our set of metrics, and then we run it to the traffic engineers, and they have their whole body of knowledge. And in the different camps, it seems like they may see us as trying to wreck their beautiful system, and we see them as the gatekeepers that can shut things down. And so this idea that working through the differences in our separate knowledge bases maybe is a way to move forward. So that's something I'm sorry it's not a question.
No. Well, you know, I think that's one of the advantages of these, of the tactic, is that it can be short-term and enable some of the controversy to be dissipated in some cases, let's say between the planner and the traffic engineer, by saying, it's not a forever change, it doesn't cost a lot, let's try it out, and then let's observe what the results are. And one of the things, Danielle's paper, which looked at the parklets in terms of observation, I found myself, upon first reading, saying, well, these are your observations. Someone else might ask for scientific counts for you to sit there several days in a row and really count how many people used it in certain ways. And then some other way of counting the effect on the parking. But in fact, I think probably, depending on observation in a situation like this, could be adequate for that controversy. I don't know, that's a question that I have. Yes, Wanda. So you might use a parking space in front of a bus stop to make the waiting for the bus a more amenable experience. So you mentioned the San Francisco manual. Is that a help?
So at this point in time, it's my understanding that a lot of the parklets, they're started by business owners and then some residents. So I highlighted the Deeplit, the Deep Stand National Parklet, and that was a very enthusiastic resident who wanted his own parklet, well, a shared parklet. But what I really like your comment from before, and just to stress to everybody else that, you know, right now we're in the CNU community and we talk in terms of tactical urbanism and parklet, but when I'm talking amongst my friends and, you know, I say like, oh, I'm speaking about parklets, and then some people are like, what are parklets, you know, outside of city planning or transportation engineering, and then just telling them about this idea just to continue to spread what these figuring out other languages to use besides just like tactical urbanism. You know, if you say like, oh, you know, think about this parking space, wouldn't it be cool to just have a park there? Well, there's a thing called parklets, like introducing that. And then to your point about whether or not people know about it. So in San Francisco, they're required to put a fairly large sign that says public parklet, and there's like 2 or 3 like at each parklet you'll see it. So unless you have to read the sign to see it, but the more and more you engage, then the more you know. So
Question here, and then we'll move across the aisle. Yes.
My name is Christopher Peter. I'm an architect in San Francisco. And I have a question on the bicycle sharing in Denver. I wonder to what degree the weather came up as a factor in the planning, and to what degree that the data has tracked the mode share, and if there's a differential between summer, spring, fall, and winter.
Sure. Yeah, definitely weather is a factor, but maybe not in the way that you might think. Currently, the Denver bike sharing system stays open from mid-March to the beginning of December. And the perception of Denver is that it's fairly snowy, but in reality, we have a lot of days throughout the winter that are in the 60s and 70s, completely free of snow, and people are constantly asking why the bikes aren't available. I think there is a strong demand to have the system stay open year-round. Ridership does drop, but I've found that it's more associated with the change in daylight savings than it is weather. When daylight savings time ends and standard time begins, there's a noticeable drop-off each year in the number of riders, and that's backed up by conversations that I have with people who use the system who are less interested in riding a bike at night among cars. So weather is certainly a factor, but there probably isn't enough yet known about it as to whether or not it would dramatically affect operations if it were to remain open year-round. Most of the other large bike sharing systems in the U.S. do close down at some portion of the year, DC being the exception.
So, Michael, hold on a second. One question, because this was a question about data, too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Is the data continuing to be maintained, and who's managing it? Because that's a kind of interesting
Sure.
aspect. If you're going to try something out and say we want to do it, maybe we want to do it for a longer term, somebody has to
Sure.
be managing that.
During the DNC, all data were manually entered each time a person checked out a bike and returned it. That's a tremendous amount of work. However, modern automated bike sharing systems generate a tremendous amount of data each time someone checks out a bike and checks it back in. So that's all automated. It's easily tracked, and many systems make at least some of their data available. That said, that's just usage data. Subscriber data are less well known. Very few pieces of information are gathered other than credit card information when someone registers. So other than investigations like I've done in the Denver bike sharing system to understand the demography of users, that's not automatically collected. So that's much less known in most other systems.
Thank you. Michael?
Oh, I was just going to add on the weather issue that I think weather tends to be less of a factor in bicycle use than we think. I mean, Portland has 35-degree and raining weather pretty, months on end, and it doesn't seem to affect ridership very much, actually. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, the daylight saving time is a good one. Yes? Can you tell us who you are?
That's a great question, and that's for further research.
Yes, that's the next project. That's good. Yeah. Yes?
Danielle, San Francisco has somewhat of a reputation for quirkiness.
Yes.
And I can see how parklets maybe started out as a solution to a very practical need, but has it also turned into a kind of an aspect of the city's brand, helping to work with your city's brand, and becoming a tourism strategy? Is that an unintended consequence, or do you think that was thought about when the parklets were first initiated?
I don't think that was first thought about initially, because it was really a group of artists, right, and design folks who just wanted to improve their space. And then I think that because San Francisco as a city is fairly progressive, the planning department started the Pavement to Parks program, so really leading the way there. As far as tourism, I'm not quite sure I have numbers or how you would quantify if there's a significant increase in that way, like what measures would you use? But yeah, it's very cool. I like it.
The tourism question, I think, brings up what opportunities are there for programming tactically public space in some more directed way.
Well, and also, is it characteristic of tactical urbanism that there are going to be unintended consequences? It makes it really the advantage.
Yeah, who knows? The unintended consequences.
If I could add on to that just a little bit, speaking of unintended consequences, initially Denver bike sharing for a permanent system, it was anticipated that the majority of the trips would be for commuting for residents of the area. And as it turns out, it's almost the exact opposite. There is a huge number of rides done by people who, one of the very few items that are collected by people when they use the system is their zip code of home address. So it's possible to track those who are from outside the area. And about half of them are from outside of Colorado. And from the other half, about half of those are from outside the Denver metro area. So there are a large number of people who are using the bike sharing system who we did not anticipate using it. And it's changed the character of the city to some degree for tourists, in that it's more accessible to get to a number of different places on the bikes without having to rent a car or be adherent to bus or train schedules. Unanticipated.
I wonder if there are any other examples of what you might call tactical urbanism in other parts of the country that could be described from among the audience. This is, speaking of speed, I think this is a fairly new idea, a new terminology, and already a year ago in the city of Miami, the Downtown Development Authority authored such an endeavor in which they took the downtown boulevard, Biscayne Boulevard, which has a large quantity of parking lot down the center of it, actually, and took a whole block and greened it, grassed it with various types of furnishing and so on. And so it had a conventional engineering firm permit it and manage the construction, and the DDA is the Downtown Development Authority. It's very much of a conventional business-oriented group, and so how quickly this concept moved from guerrilla tactics to Chamber of Commerce activity. Are there any others? Yes.
Well, there's an interesting thing that happened at the White House where a guy who, there are dangers to it because he painted a crosswalk, 52-year-old resident, and he was arrested by the police. He was charged with felony vandalizing and is facing a jail time.
For painting a crosswalk.
Yeah, so it's good to do the liberals.
Yes.
The original modern pre-technical urbanism stuff is spawned out of the block project of Dallas. And so it's more commercial district revitalization focused, but it spawned many efforts around the country. But I mean, that plus parking day for the modern tactical pre-Mike Library real stuff. And better blocks been done in a lot of places in North America. It takes a long time to improve a commercial district, as everyone else. But in those need purposive analytics too. But those are parklets obviously grew out of that, and then they're spawned in a lot of cities. I mean, now cities are becoming, I mean, that's an example, Vancouver, LA, Chicago. And then the guerrilla, the true anti, F the state and revolution. There are a lot of examples of this cross-pollination all across the country too. And in most cities, the DPW doesn't like it much.
Yeah, right. How about a question from a new person, and then we'll close it down in about 2 or 3 minutes. If you stand, it might be easier for us to hear you. Thank you. Thank you. One more question, yes.
In San Francisco, do you now have a permit application for the parklet? Is that?
Yeah, it's a official request for proposal. So they released what in the parklet manual goes through all of that. So there's I think 2 call for parklets, and then you have to submit all the architect's drawings and yeah, there's a whole process. And I think they're in their 3rd cycle now.
Perhaps learning from food carts. Anyway, thank you all for being with us. I think we still might have a few more minutes if you'd like to speak individually with the presenters. Thank you.